Hi everybody, welcome to Sampler Sunday. I'm so excited to be able to come back and share about another sampler with you today. Thank you for everyone that commented last week, and I look forward to reading your comments again. I did have one question that was addressed to me that I told them I would try and answer this week. So I'm going to start off by trying to give a good answer to that question. The question was, why are samplers so popular right now? Well, I know why I like to stitch samplers, but I wanted to hear from a few others. So I posted the question on my Facebook page and came up with a few reasons that kind of let me know everybody feels pretty much the same way if you're a sampler stitcher. And probably the biggest reason that I found was the history or the connection to the stitcher that came before us. And for me, that's probably one of the biggest reasons I enjoy the samplers. I love to think about who actually stitched the original while I'm stitching the reproduction. It's fun to think, why did they pick the colors they picked? Why did they pick the verse they picked? What was happening that made them stitch the sampler? So just all of those thoughts as I'm stitching connect me to that stitcher that originally did the sampler. And I found out that a lot of you feel the same way. Another thing that I saw in several of the answers was that stitchers enjoy just the repetitive nature of a sampler. A lot of people enjoy stitching the alphabets or the motifs that go along with the sampler. I know borders. There's so many different borders that are beautiful. All of those things seem to be top of the list. And I know samplers are very popular right now, but if you're a sampler stitcher, you've probably enjoyed samplers for a lot longer than they've been super popular. And that's kind of me. I've always enjoyed the history. I've always enjoyed the feeling of accomplishment. Okay, I've got the first alphabet done. It's like a mini finish. And so all of those things still play into the reasons we still stitch samplers today. So if you've never tried stitching a sampler, I'd love to encourage you to, and hopefully you'll get hooked just like many of the rest of us do. It's just a sense of accomplishment. It's a feeling of bonding with those stitchers that came ahead and just having a beautiful finished piece when you're done. So I hope that helped answer your question. And if you have any more questions about samplers in general, not that I'll know the answer, but I'll sure look for it. So feel free to post those down below. Today, I want to talk about a sampler that I'm in the process of charting. I'm not finished. I kind of take a break in between. I'm stitching on a model, so I may one evening say, you know, I'm not going to stitch this evening, I'm just going to chart. And so it gives me a little break in between what I'm doing. And this is the one that I'm working on charting right now. I'm calling it Kind Providence. Usually when I reproduce a sampler, I title it with the stitcher's name and the date that the sampler was stitched. With this particular one, the verse really is what jumped out at me. And it's a verse about kind providence. Providence meaning taking care of someone, a higher deity that's looking down, kind of guarding us and making sure that we're provided for. And so that really spoke to me, and that's what I chose to title this particular sampler with. And the sampler, let me hold it up and give you a peek. It's not a great big sampler, but I loved the colors, I loved the verse, and especially these sweet little rose dividing bands with it looks like little rosebuds. I just thought they were so sweet, and then there's some at the bottom as well. This was stitched by a Jane die, and this particular sampler has a lot of thread loss. Fortunately, I was able to still kind of see the shadow to tell that it was a D-Y-E die. And when Jane stitched this sampler, she was 11 years old. And I know last week when I was talking about that particular sampler, I didn't know how old the young lady was that stitched the sampler because she didn't give her age. She gave the date the sampler was done, but not her age. And when someone does that, that's a huge help. It's a huge clue to helping to locate the stitcher. And so on this one, Jane has Jane Dye, age 11, 1836. So it's simple mathematics. I'm just going to subtract 11 from 1836 and come up with her birth date. Her birth date could be 1834. It could be 1835. It's right in, kind of in that range. So I'm going to look within a couple years just to make sure. Another thing, another clue, we have to be Sherlock Holmes when we're researching these samplers. So I'm looking for clues. Another clue that's going to help me with this particular sampler is that I know from a little note attached to the back of it that it was an American sampler. She was born here in the United States. So as I'm researching, I can limit my search to her birth date and United States as a place of birth. And I think I have found Jane. I'm really excited because while there's not a lot that is told about her, it simply says she was born in Kentucky. She had 10 children in 19 years. That tells me she was a very busy woman. I cannot imagine keeping up with 10 children all within a short age span. 10 children in 19 years, there wasn't a huge age gap. And so can you imagine having that many toddlers running around? I can't. She died in Missouri at age 72. And the only thing else that I found, someone had posted a picture of a Jane Dye. And now, do I know without a shadow of doubt this is the Jane Dye that did the sampler? Not yet. I feel pretty confident though with what I found, and it's just kind of fun to imagine. So I'm going to show you a picture of Jane. Now this picture was taken at a much later age in life. She was not 11, obviously, when this picture was made, but still we can see Jane and just imagine. This is who stitched this sampler that I'm sitting here holding. You guys know I'm a little nerdy like that. I just think, oh my goodness, that's Jane. She did this. I wonder what she thought as she sat and stitched this sampler. What made her pick rosebuds to stitch for her border? Was that her favorite flower? She must have liked the color pink because she's used a lot of it in this sampler. And so it's just kind of fun to make a connection, and especially to have a picture that I can look at and think, Jane, what were you thinking when you did this sampler? That's kind of unusual because most of the samplers I have, I don't have a picture of the stitcher. It's all in my imagination what they might have looked like. So when we can find a photograph, it makes it fun to imagine her as the stitcher that did this sampler. Now, there's a couple other things I want to share about this particular sampler. One of the things, I'm going to try and show it to you. It's kind of hard to see, I know, especially on a video. But this word right here is pass. And if you'll notice, it's P-A, and it looks like an F-S. That F is called a long S, and it was used a lot up until probably the first quarter of the 19th century. The S, it really is an S, even though it looks like an F. But the S that we see at the beginning of a word or the end of a word would have looked like the S we're familiar with. An S that looks like an F in the center or the middle of a word was called a long F, or a printer's S, because they would have used probably the same little print block for the S and the F. And that was just the way they did things at that time. So one fun thing is that it can give us a clue. It's another clue to help Sherlock figure out who or what time period a sampler was done in. And so we know just by that particular mark that this sampler was probably done in the early 19th century. And even if we didn't have other clues or the fact that she put the date that the sampler was completed, we could use that to help us figure out when this sampler was completed. Same thing for motifs, and I'll show you some samplers in future Sundays that have lots of motifs that give clues as to where that sampler was made. And so to me, that's another part of the fun of working with samplers, is using all of those clues to kind of figure out when was the sampler done? Where was the sampler done? And so that long S, even though we know the date this was completed, that's just kind of fun to associate with this particular time period. So I'm going to read that verse to you, and hopefully you'll see why I named it Kind Providence. It says, I sigh not for beauty, nor languish for wealth, but grant me kind providence, virtue, and health. Then richer than kings and more happy than they, my days will pass sweetly and swiftly away. But those who worship God and give their parents honor due, here on this earth they long shall live, and live hereafter too. So just a sweet verse where she was knowing that she was being taken care of, and she's honoring those who take care of her. At the top, this is another little thing I wanted to point out. The alphabet, you can kind of see, even though it's very faded, as I go on down, the color starts showing. If I flip it over, you can see some of that blue peeking out as well. So that particular color really faded. The rest of the colors, the burgundies and pinks and greens, are just as vibrant on the front as they are on the back. And that could have come from what they used in the dye to make the blue. It just didn't hold up the same as the burgundies and pinks and greens did. So that was kind of interesting. I was able to still decipher what was at the top. Just because it was faded, I could still see where the stitches were made. And some of the places that had missing stitches, I'm going to see if I can, this one possibly, you can see that G. Even though some of the thread is missing at the top of that G, you can still see the holes where the stitches went. And that can be helpful if you have like a white towel or a white piece of paper to put under your sampler, or even a light box. I know Amazon has some excellent light boxes that are pretty cheap that you can get. You can lay your sampler on top and kind of see where the missing thread should have gone, and that's very helpful. This sampler was just, to me, kind of fun because of the colors and the verse. That was probably what drew me to this particular sampler. It needs some tender loving care. This sampler, as you can see, was nailed probably to a board at some point in time and displayed. And that was a pretty common practice. Unfortunately, that's really hurt the edge of this sampler. Not so much that I can't see how the stitches were and get it reproduced. And at the time that they mounted this on a board, they just were happy with how it looked. They wanted to get it up and display it and show off the work of their daughter. And they weren't too concerned that anybody else in the future would ever even want to see this, probably. I would love to know what some of these stitchers think or would think if they knew here we are 100, 200 years later stitching their work. And I think that would be interesting to know, just kind of their thoughts on that. So when they nailed this to the board, they weren't thinking about us looking at it years and years and years later. I have gone ahead, I'm going to share what I've picked to use to do the reproduction and talk just a little bit about that process. When I decide to reproduce a sampler, I'm going to look, and I like to get it pretty close to what the original was. I want it to be just as close as I can. Sometimes you can't get it exact because we're talking different dye lots, different types of linens, but you can still get fairly close. As I looked at this original, it's got a lot of some stains and it looks very mottledy. And I originally picked out a Fiber on a Whim Dune because I liked it having a little bit of green in it, and it had quite a bit of mottling. And I thought, oh, this is going to be perfect. It's a beautiful piece of linen that will really look kind of cool to do the sampler on. Then I always take my original, I look at the front and I look at the back for the colors. And I want to try and match up as closely as I can. Now, usually I love to use the 103s. I also have used DMC, and that's because I like having the solid color. You wouldn't have seen variegated thread in a lot of these samplers. So when I reproduce them, I want to make sure to get it as true to the original as I can. And if I had a really variegated thread, it would be a little different. But I visited with someone, they said, you need to try the Simply Shaker threads. So I agreed that I would try it on one sampler. And so fortunately, as I started looking at them, the colors just really matched up with this sampler, and I was so pleased. So let's see if I can't kind of get them all in a little grouping. This is the color palette that I ended up going with. And if I hold the original up, you can hopefully see where these colors match in. Of course, they look a lot darker here because they're in a big clump versus when I take a thread out to do on the linen. But I think I'm going to be really happy with how that turns out. The only problem I ran into, endive is one of the greens that I chose. And as I went, let me just pull the endive, it just disappeared into this linen. I thought some places it's probably going to show up, but not as much as I want. It would be okay, but I really want the colors to pop. So I went back to the drawing board, not on my colors, but on my linen. And I knew I still wanted my linen to have just a hint of green. And so as I'm looking, I found this is another Fiber on a Whim linen, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, Affogato. And it has, I don't know that you'll be able to see it. It looks like the video is just showing it as a brown, but it has a beautiful light green in it. And so when I put the endive, which is the color that I was concerned about, it still popped. And so the final test, I'm going to put the other colors up, and I love how they show off on this linen. So that's the color linen that I decided to go with. So it's just kind of a process. It's a matter of picking out, I usually will pick out my floss first and then try and match it up with the linen. I did a little different this time and had to go back and change. So I'll probably go back to my floss, then linen from now on. But that will be the future Kind Providence sampler. So with this sampler, I'm not sure how I'm going to finish it, other than it may just be framed. I've thought about if I could get a long board to put it on, or just hem stitch. I'm not sure. So this is to be continued. You'll have to just wait and see how I end up finishing the model on this one. All right, last week I talked and I had several winners because it had been a while before we had drawn for prizes. And I want you to know I meant to get those out first of the week, and we had, seemed like everything happened. We had painters coming to repaint one side of the house, you name it, it happened this week. But I have those packaged. They will go out tomorrow, and you should get them in 2 to 3 days. So that's something to be looking forward to if you were a winner that was announced last week. And then I mentioned that each week I will give away with the Sampler Sunday something to do with samplers. And last week's giveaway was this paddle, because I think this is a great size to put a little marking sampler or something on. And that winner is Wanda Welhousen. And Wanda, I apologize if I did not pronounce your last name correctly. So Wanda, if you will send me an email, you'll find the email in the link below. I'll get this shipped off to you. If you'll get it to me even this evening, if you happen to watch this today, I'll send it when I go to the post office with the other packages tomorrow. Then my giveaway for this next week, I don't have Kind Providence completely charted and finished yet. Otherwise, I give away that as a chart. But I'm going to give away a chart. This is one of my Nashville exclusives, Ruth Ann Boardman, 1827. And she's just a sweet little sampler. And I hope maybe if you're not a sampler stitcher, if you win this will get you hooked and you'll be ready to stitch samplers with the rest of us. So this will be my giveaway for this week. So just comment below. I'll draw a name from those that have commented, and I'll get this sent out to the winner next week. I do want, before I let you go, to tell you one more little thing. I had my notes and I nearly forgot it, so sorry. On the research for the Jane Dye sampler, the Kind Providence sampler today, I had said last week that I would share a sampler that had an Arkansas connection. And so let me explain the connection to this sampler. One of the things as I'm researching that I enjoy doing is not just learning about the stitcher, but I want to know what was happening in the world around them during the time the sampler was stitched. Because I think when big events or life events happen, it can kind of influence our stitching. I know the year that my son and his wife got married, I was looking all year thinking, what am I going to stitch them? Because I have to stitch something for their wedding and their home. And so for a while until I picked it out, that kind of consumed my interest in stitching, was what am I going to stitch for them for their wedding? During COVID, when we were under lockdown, I wanted to stitch really happy things because it was no fun being kind of cooped up. The world was kind of a scary place for a while. And I just wanted to stitch happy thoughts and happy things. When my son was in the Marines and was deployed, I really got on a patriotic kick. And so I have a whole wall full of patriotic stitching because that's really kind of guided my direction that I wanted to go with stitching. And I feel like these young ladies and men who stitch samplers, was there something happening in the world around them that influenced their sampler design? And so I try and go and look at the year, what big things happened that year. Not that it influenced it, but it might have. And so if I look at the year 1836 here in the United States, what was going on? Texas declared independence from Mexico and the Battle of the Alamo happened. I don't know that that influenced her stitching, but it was still a big event. It's something she would have been aware of. And who knows? Did she have family that happened to be down there? Another event that connects Arkansas became the 25th state in the year 1836. And by living in Missouri for part of her life, she would have been a neighbor to Arkansas. So I think, that's definitely something she would have been aware of going on. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting. So as you're doing these samplers, take a minute and kind of look at what was happening in the world around them. Could it have influenced? Look at your sampler. Is there something in that sampler that makes you think, yes, I could see where that influenced her? And just make it kind of a fun treasure hunt as you stitch your samplers. So glad I didn't forget that. I'd have felt bad because I said there's an Arkansas connection and I would have failed to tell you guys. But thank you again for joining in. I'm looking forward to these Sundays, and next week I have a sampler that was stitched by a little boy, and I can't wait to share it with you. It will be a Nashville release for next spring, but I will share it with you and we'll talk about it. And it's kind of unusual because it's an American sampler, but also because the little boy stitched it. So we'll look forward to having that next week. And until then, you guys get some stitching in, enjoy your week, and take care. Bye.